Hey there, and welcome to Dark Creaky TV. If you're new, hit that subscribe button for spine-tingling Reddit creepypasta stories that are perfect for a night of chilling thrills. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and let's get into tonight's stories. I played with a Ouija board, and now I'm being stalked by a spirit. Hey everyone, I never thought I'd be the one posting something like this, but I need to share my story, and I could really use some advice. It's going to be long, so bear with me. It all started a few months ago. My friends and I were bored one Friday night, so we decided to do something different. We'd always been into spooky stuff, horror movies, ghost stories, urban legends. So when someone suggested we try a Ouija board, it didn't take much convincing. We were all in our early 20s, just looking for a thrill, you know? We bought a board online, and the moment it arrived, we knew we were in for a wild night. We set the mood, candles, dim lights, the whole shebang. There were 5 of us, me, Jake, my girlfriend Sarah, our buddy Mike, his girlfriend Lisa, and our friend Tom. We started by asking the usual stupid questions. Is anyone there? And what's your name? Not really expecting anything to happen. But after a few minutes, the planchette started to move. At first, we thought it was a joke. I mean, one of us had to be pushing it, right? But it was moving too smoothly, too deliberately. It spelled out a name, A-L-E-X. None of us knew an Alex, so we just laughed it off. We kept asking questions, and it kept answering. But the answers started getting weird. Where are you from? We asked. H-E-L-L, it spelled out. Okay, very funny, Mike said, rolling his eyes. Who's messing with us? The planchette moved to spell N-O-B-O-D-Y. At this point, Sarah started looking really uncomfortable. Maybe we should stop, she suggested, but the rest of us wanted to keep going. It was just a game, right? We asked more questions, and the answers became more disturbing. It claimed to have been murdered, described the details vividly, too vividly. It told us it was watching us, that it knew where we lived, where we slept. Lisa started crying, saying she didn't want to do this anymore, but Mike convinced her to stay. Then it said something that chilled us to the bone. I see you. We all froze. The room was dead silent except for the sound of our breathing. What do you mean? I asked, my voice shaking. I'm here, it spelled out. We all felt it then, this oppressive presence, like the air had turned to lead. Tom swore he saw a shadow move in the corner of the room. That was it for Sarah. She yanked her hands off the board and backed away, nearly knocking over a candle. I'm done, she said. This isn't funny anymore. But the planchette kept moving, even though no one was touching it. It spelled out N-O-T-D-O-N-E. At that point, we all freaked out. We tried to say goodbye, to close the session properly, but the board wouldn't let us. The planchette moved erratically, spelling out nonsense words. Then it spelled D-I-E. The candles flickered and the lights dimmed, though no one was near the switch. Lisa screamed and Tom bolted for the door. We all followed, leaving the board behind. That night, none of us slept well. I had nightmares about the board, about the name Alex, about the word die flashing in front of my eyes. I woke up in a cold sweat around 3 a.m. and felt like someone was watching me, even though I was alone in my room. The next day, I called the others. Everyone had had a rough night, but we tried to laugh it off. Just our imaginations, Mike said. We scared ourselves, but things got worse, much worse. It started with small things, objects moving on their own, strange noises in the middle of the night. I'd leave my keys on the kitchen counter and find them on the floor in the morning. Sarah said she heard whispering in her apartment, but when she turned on the lights, no one was there. Tom found scratches on his arms when he woke up, deep enough to bleed, but he had no memory of doing it himself. Lisa had it the worst. She called me one night, hysterical, saying she saw a man standing at the foot of her bed. When she turned on the light, he was gone, but she swore she wasn't dreaming. She moved back in with her parents after that. We decided to destroy the board. Mike took it out to the woods behind his house and burned it. We thought that would be the end of it, but it wasn't. The next night, I woke up to the sound of scratching at my window. I live on the 3rd floor, so there's no way anyone could be out there. I opened the blinds, and for a split second, I saw a face, pale, with hollow eyes, staring back at me. I screamed and stumbled back, and when I looked again, it was gone. I called Sarah, but she didn't answer. I tried the others, no luck. I spent the rest of the night with all the lights on, jumping at every little sound. In the morning, I had a voicemail from Sarah. Her voice was shaky, terrified. "Jake, something's wrong. I saw him, the man from the board. He was in my apartment. I don't know what to do. Please call me back." I called her a dozen times, but she never answered. I drove to her place, but no one was there. Her car was gone, and her apartment looked empty. I asked her neighbours, but no one had seen her. The police wouldn't help. They said she was an adult and had the right to disappear if she wanted. But I knew she wouldn't just leave without telling me. I started seeing him everywhere, in reflections, in crowds, even in my dreams. The pale face with hollow eyes. He never spoke, just watched. I felt like I was losing my mind. Then I got a message from an unknown number. "You can't escape." I moved out of my apartment, staying with friends, but it didn't help. He followed me. Everywhere I went, I felt his presence. I started drinking to numb the fear, but it only made things worse. I lost my job, my friends, everything. And now I'm writing this because I don't know what else to do. I'm scared. I'm alone. And I think he's coming for me next. If anyone has any advice, anything at all, please help me. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. Hey everyone, it's Jake again. I'm still here, barely holding on. I'm sorry it took so long to get back to you, but things have gotten really bad. I'm not even sure where to start, but I'll try to pick up where I left off. After I posted part 1, I decided to stay at a motel on the edge of town. I thought maybe putting some distance between me and everything familiar might help. It didn't. The first night there, I woke up to the sound of someone whispering my name. I was alone, but the whispering didn't stop. It got louder and louder until I had to cover my ears. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I'm not sure how long it lasted, but it felt like hours. When it finally stopped, I was shaking and drenched in sweat. I looked around the room, and that's when I saw it. Written on the mirror in what looked like blood, "You can't escape." I grabbed my stuff and bolted. I ended up driving around for hours, too afraid to stop. Eventually, I found myself at a 24-hour diner. I was exhausted and probably looked like a madman, but I didn't care. I needed to be around people. I stayed at the diner until dawn, nursing a coffee and trying to stay awake. The staff gave me weird looks, but no one said anything. When the sun finally came up, I decided to go to the police again. I told them everything. About the Ouija board, the haunting, Sarah's disappearance. They didn't believe me, of course. Who would? They said they'd look into Sarah's case, but I could tell they thought she just ran off. I went back to my car, feeling hopeless. That's when I got a text from an unknown number. It was a picture of Sarah, tied to a chair, with terror in her eyes. The message read, "Time's running out." I tried calling the number, but it went straight to voicemail. I drove to Sarah's apartment again, hoping for some kind of clue, but it was still empty. I was losing my mind. Everywhere I went, I felt like I was being watched. Every shadow seemed to move. Every sound made me jump. I started digging into the history of the Ouija board we used. I found out that the spirit we contacted, Alex, had a dark past. According to some obscure forums and old newspaper articles, Alex was a serial killer in the 1800s. He tortured and murdered at least a dozen people before he was finally caught and hanged. His last words were a curse on those who wronged him, swearing he'd come back from the dead to take revenge. It sounded like bullshit, but I was desperate. I reached out to anyone who might know how to deal with this. Mediums, paranormal investigators, even a local priest. Most of them thought I was crazy, but one woman, an older medium named Agatha, agreed to meet with me. Agatha lived in a small house on the outskirts of town. The place reeked of incense and herbs, and it was filled with all sorts of creepy occult stuff. Crystals, Candles, strange symbols painted on the walls. She listened to my story without interrupting, her face growing more serious by the minute. "This is very bad," she said finally. "Spirits like Alex are very powerful. He's feeding on your fear, growing stronger with each passing day. You need to break the connection." "How do I do that?" I asked, desperate. "There's a ritual," she said, "but it's dangerous. You need to confront him, force him to leave. If you fail, it could cost you your life." At this point, I didn't have much to lose. Agatha gave me a list of items I needed: candles, salt, sage, and a few other things. She also gave me a small silver amulet for protection. I gathered everything and went back to the motel. That night, I followed Agatha's instructions. I drew a circle of salt on the floor and placed the candles around it. I lit the sage and started the chant she taught me. For a while, nothing happened. Then the temperature dropped and the lights flickered. I felt a cold breeze brush past me, even though the windows were closed. And then he appeared. Alex stood just outside the circle, his eyes hollow and dark, his face twisted in a malevolent grin. He didn't say anything, just watched me. I kept chanting, my voice shaking, trying to ignore the terror rising in my chest. "Leave this place," I commanded, holding up the amulet. "You're not welcome here." He laughed, a sound that made my blood run cold. "You think this will stop me?" he hissed. "You're mine, Jake. You and everyone you love." The candles flickered and went out. The room plunged into darkness. I felt a force hit me, knocking me out of the circle. Pain shot through my body as I hit the floor. I tried to scramble back, but something grabbed my leg and pulled me. I screamed, kicking and thrashing, but it was no use. I felt cold hands around my throat, squeezing. I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred and I thought this was it, that I was going to die. But then, the amulet around my neck started to glow. The grip on my throat loosened, and I managed to crawl back into the circle. Alex shrieked, a sound of pure rage and pain. The candles reignited, casting an eerie light around the room. He writhed and twisted, his form becoming more transparent, until finally, with one last scream, he vanished. I collapsed, gasping for air. The room was silent, but I knew it wasn't over. I could still feel his presence, lurking, waiting. The ritual had weakened him, but he wasn't gone. I don't know what to do next. Agatha says I need to find Sarah, that she's the key to breaking this once and for all, but I have no idea where she is, or if she's even still alive. If anyone out there has any experience with this kind of thing, please, I'm begging you, help me. I'm running out of time. Hey everyone, it's Jake again. I'm sorry it's taken me a while to post this, but things have only gotten worse. I've barely slept, and I feel like I'm constantly on the edge of losing my mind. But I need to keep going. If not for me, then for Sarah. Here's what's happened since my last update. After the failed ritual, I knew I had to find Sarah. Agatha's words kept echoing in my mind. She's the key. But with no leads, and Alex still haunting my every step, I felt helpless. I decided to go back to the diner, where I'd spent that one restless night. I figured it was as good a place as any to start. I talked to the waitress who'd served me before. She remembered me, probably because I looked like a wreck. I asked if she'd seen Sarah, showing her a picture. At first, she shook her head, but then she paused. "Wait a minute," she said. "There was a girl here a few nights ago. Looked a lot like her. She was with some guy, seemed real jittery. They left together." My heart skipped a beat. "Did you hear where they were going?" I asked. She shook her head again, but then one of the cooks chimed in. "They were talking about some abandoned place out by the old quarry. Weird stuff happens out there. Wouldn't go near it myself." It was a lead at least. I drove out to the quarry, my anxiety mounting with every mile. The place was creepy as hell. Crumbling buildings, rusted machinery, and an eerie silence that seemed to swallow all sound. I parked my car and started exploring, calling out for Sarah. The wind whistled through the empty structures, but there was no sign of her. Then I heard it, a faint cry for help. My heart pounded as I followed the sound, moving deeper into the maze of decaying buildings. I turned a corner and saw her. Sarah was tied to a chair, looking weak and terrified, but alive. "Sarah!" I shouted, rushing to her. As I got closer, I saw the state she was in. Bruises on her arms, her clothes torn. She looked at me with wide, desperate eyes. "Jake, it's a trap!" she screamed. Before I could react, something hit me from behind. Pain exploded in my head, and I fell to the ground. Everything went black. I woke up to find myself tied to a chair next to Sarah. My head throbbed, and my vision was blurry. Standing in front of us was a man I didn't recognize. Tall, gaunt, with a sickening smile on his face. "Welcome to my humble abode," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "I see you've met Alex." It clicked then. This was the man from the picture, the one who'd kidnapped Sarah, but he wasn't Alex. He was just another pawn, manipulated by the spirit. The real Alex was standing behind him, his ghostly form flickering in and out of sight, a twisted grin on his face. "You've been quite the nuisance, Jake," the man continued. "But now it's time for the fun to begin." He pulled out a knife, and my blood ran cold. "Let her go," I pleaded. "This is between me and Alex." The man laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Oh, it's far too late for that. You see, Alex feeds on fear, and thanks to you, he's gotten quite strong. But he needs one more thing to fully cross over. A sacrifice." Sarah whimpered, and I struggled against the ropes, but it was no use. The man approached her, knife in hand, and I felt a surge of desperation. "Stop!" I shouted. "I'll do anything, just let her go." The man paused, considering. "Anything?" he asked, his eyes gleaming with sadistic glee. "Yes," I said, my voice shaking. "Take me instead. Just let her go." Alex's form flickered, and for a moment I thought I saw a glimmer of satisfaction in his hollow eyes. The man nodded and started to untie Sarah. "Fine," he said. "She can go, but you, Jake, you belong to Alex now." Sarah screamed, struggling to stay, but the man shoved her out of the building. "Run!" I shouted to her. "Get out of here!" She hesitated, tears streaming down her face, but then she turned and fled. The man turned back to me, the knife gleaming in his hand. "This will hurt," he said, almost casually, and then he plunged the knife into my side. Pain exploded through my body. I gasped, blood pouring from the wound. The man twisted the knife, and I screamed, the world spinning around me. Alex's ghostly form loomed over me, feeding off my agony. But then, something unexpected happened. The amulet around my neck started to glow again, brighter this time. The light grew, enveloping me, and I felt a surge of energy. The man stumbled back, covering his eyes. "No!" he shouted. "This isn't possible!" Alex's form flickered, then started to disintegrate, his screams blending with the man's. The light from the amulet intensified until it was blinding. I felt the ropes binding me snap, and the pain in my side dulled. When the light finally faded, both Alex and the man were gone. I was lying on the floor, bleeding, but alive. Sarah was gone, hopefully safe. I managed to crawl out of the building, clutching my side, and collapsed by my car. Somehow, I made it to the hospital. They patched me up, said I was lucky to be alive, but I know it's not over. Alex might be gone for now, but the scars he left, both physical and mental, are still there. I'm going to find Sarah, make sure she's safe, and then I'm going to find a way to end this once and for all. If anyone has any advice, please, I need all the help I can get. Hey everyone, Jake here again. Thanks for sticking with me through this nightmare. I'm back, and things have taken another dark turn. I need to share what's happened since my last post. After I got out of the hospital, my first priority was finding Sarah. I had no idea where she'd gone, but I hoped she'd gone to someone she trusted. I started by checking her parents' house. When I got there, her mum answered the door, her face pale and worried. "Jake, thank God you're here," she said, pulling me inside. "Sarah's been hiding here since the night she escaped. She's terrified." She led me to the living room where Sarah was curled up on the couch, looking like she hadn't slept in days. When she saw me, she burst into tears and ran into my arms. "I thought I lost you," she sobbed. "I thought he'd killed you." "I'm okay," I assured her. even though I was far from it. We're going to get through this, together. We spent the next few days at her parents' house, trying to figure out our next move. We knew Alex wasn't gone for good, and it was only a matter of time before he came back. I contacted Agatha again, hoping she had more answers. When we met, she looked more serious than ever. "Alex is still out there," she said. "He's weakened but not defeated. He'll come for you both again. We need to perform a more powerful ritual to banish him for good." Agatha explained that we needed to go back to where it all started, the house where we used the Ouija board. We had to draw Alex back there and perform the banishment ritual. She gave us a detailed list of what we needed: special herbs, a silver dagger, a mirror, and of course, the amulet. We gathered everything and headed to the house. It was eerie being back there, where this whole nightmare began. The place felt different, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. We set up the ritual in the living room, the same spot where we used the Ouija board. Agatha directed us, her voice calm but firm. We formed a circle with the herbs, placed the mirror in the center, and laid the dagger and amulet beside it. As we began the chant, the temperature in the room dropped, the candles flickered, and shadows danced on the walls. I felt that familiar, oppressive presence, and I knew Alex was near. Suddenly the lights went out. We were plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the flickering candles. Sarah clutched my hand, her grip tight with fear. "He's here," Agatha said, her voice steady. "Keep chanting. Don't stop, no matter what happens." We continued the chant, our voices blending into a desperate plea. The air grew colder, and a low, menacing growl filled the room. Alex's form began to materialize in the mirror, his eyes burning with rage. "You can't banish me," he roared, his voice echoing through the house. "I'll never leave." The mirror cracked, and I felt a searing pain in my chest, like I was being torn apart from the inside. I doubled over, gasping for breath, but I didn't stop chanting. Sarah's voice wavered, but she kept going, tears streaming down her face. Alex stepped out of the mirror, his form more solid than ever. He reached for Sarah, but Agatha stepped between them, holding up the amulet. It glowed with a blinding light, and Alex recoiled, hissing like a wild animal. "Now!" Agatha shouted. "Use the dagger." I grabbed the silver dagger, my hands shaking. I stepped forward, aiming for Alex's heart. He snarled and lunged at me, his ghostly form shifting and flickering. I plunged the dagger into his chest and he let out a blood-curdling scream. The room shook and the air filled with a high-pitched, deafening noise. Alex writhed, his form breaking apart, dissolving into nothingness. The light from the amulet grew brighter, enveloping everything. I felt a rush of energy, and then it was over. The room was silent, the candles had gone out, and the mirror lay shattered on the floor. I looked around, my heart pounding, and saw that Alex was gone. The oppressive presence had lifted, replaced by a strange calm. Agatha collapsed, exhausted but smiling. "It's done," she said. "He's gone." Sarah and I hugged, relief washing over us, but deep down, I knew it wasn't truly over. The scars Alex left would never fully heal, and the memory of his haunting presence would linger. We thanked Agatha and left the house, feeling a sense of closure, but also uncertainty. We returned to Sarah's parents' house, trying to rebuild our lives, but strange things kept happening. Small, almost imperceptible at first. A flicker of shadow, a cold breeze, the feeling of being watched. One night, a week after the ritual, I woke up to find Sarah staring at the window, her eyes wide with terror. "Jake," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He's back. I can feel him." I felt a chill run down my spine. I looked out the window, but there was nothing there. Still, the feeling of dread was unmistakable. We're back to square one, and I don't know what to do. If anyone has any advice, any way to help us finally break free from this nightmare, please, I'm begging you, we can't keep living like this. Hey everyone, it's Jake. This will be my final update. I wish I had a happier ending, but the truth is darker and more twisted than I could have ever imagined. If you've stuck with me this far, thank you. Here's how it all went down. After that night at Sarah's parents' house, the dread never left. We knew Alex was back, but we had no idea how to stop him. We tried contacting Agatha again, but she wasn't answering her phone. Desperate, we decided to go back to her house. When we got there, the place was dark and silent. We knocked, called out, but there was no response. Finally, we forced the door open. The smell hit us first. Something rotten, decaying. We found Agatha in her living room, slumped over her table, eyes wide open in terror, her body cold and lifeless. There were strange symbols carved into her skin, and her face was twisted in agony. On the wall behind her, written in her blood, were the words, "You can't escape." We stumbled back, horrified. Alex had gotten to her, silencing our only hope. The panic set in, and for a moment we were completely lost. But then Sarah found something on Agatha's table. Her notes. She'd been researching a final, desperate ritual. Something she must have been preparing before Alex got to her. It was dangerous and required a great sacrifice. But it was our last chance. The ritual required a return to the quarry, where the connection to Alex seemed strongest. We needed a few specific items. More herbs, another silver dagger, and something personal from each of us to bind Alex's spirit. I took the amulet Agatha had given me. Sarah took a locket she'd had since childhood. We gathered everything and headed to the quarry. The place was even more sinister at night, shadows dancing in the moonlight, the wind howling through the ruins. We set up the ritual as instructed, forming a circle with the herbs and placing the items in the center. We began the chant, our voices trembling but determined. The air grew cold, and the oppressive presence returned, stronger than ever. Alex's form materialized in the darkness, his eyes burning with malice. "You think you can stop me?" he hissed. "I'll tear you apart." He lunged at us, but we stood our ground, continuing the chant. The herbs caught fire, the flames forming a protective barrier. Alex shrieked, recoiling from the light. "Now!" I shouted, holding up the silver dagger. Sarah joined me, and together we plunged the dagger into the ground at the center of the circle. The ground shook, and a blinding light erupted from the spot, enveloping Alex. "No!" he screamed, his form disintegrating, pulled into the light. "This isn't over!" The light grew, swallowing everything. I felt a force pulling at me, trying to drag me into the abyss. Sarah grabbed my hand, holding on with all her strength. "Don't let go!" she cried. "I won't!" I shouted back, gripping her hand tightly. The light reached a crescendo, and then, with a deafening roar, it vanished. The quarry was silent, the air still. Alex was gone. We collapsed, exhausted but relieved. We had done it. We had banished Alex for good, but the cost was high. The ritual had drained us both physically and emotionally. We stumbled back to the car, barely able to stand. As we drove back to Sarah's parents' house, the silence was heavy. We knew we had won, but we also knew we could never return to our old lives. The scars Alex left were too deep, the memories too painful. We decided to leave town, to start fresh somewhere far away from all the horror. We moved to a small town on the coast, hoping to find peace. For a while, things were better. The nightmares faded, and the feeling of being watched slowly dissipated. We even started to smile again, to think about the future. But some nights, I still wake up in a cold sweat, feeling those hollow eyes watching me. I see shadows in the corners, hear whispers in the wind. I don't know if it's just my mind playing tricks on me, or if Alex somehow left a part of himself behind. I'm writing this final post to let you all know that we're okay, but also to warn you. Don't mess with things you don't understand. The supernatural is real, and it's not something to be taken lightly. If you ever find yourself in a situation like ours, seek help immediately and don't try to face it alone. Thank you for reading, for your support, and for believing in our story. I hope none of you ever have to go through what we did. Stay safe, and if you ever feel a cold breeze or see a shadow that shouldn't be there, remember our story and be careful. This is Jake, signing off. Ouija board's predictions are coming true in the worst ways. I never believed in ghosts or the supernatural. Sure, horror movies could give me a good scare, but I always chalked it up to good filmmaking and a hyperactive imagination. That changed last October when my friends and I decided to mess around with a Ouija board. I know, it sounds like the beginning of every cheesy horror story, but I swear on my life, this really happened. It was the night of our annual Halloween party. My friends and I had just turned 21, so this year's bash was supposed to be bigger and better than ever. We rented a secluded cabin in the woods, miles away from civilization, just to give it that extra spooky vibe. We were all drunk and high, feeling invincible and stupidly brave. That's when Jenna, my girlfriend, suggested we try the Ouija board her grandmother had passed down to her. I remember her saying, "It'll be fun, just for laughs." The cabin was dimly lit, with candles flickering, casting eerie shadows on the walls. We gathered around the wooden table, the board set up in the center, the alphabet, numbers, and words yes and no etched into its surface seemed harmless enough. But there was something off about it. It felt heavy, almost like it was waiting. We placed our fingers on the planchette, and Jenna started asking questions. At first, it was silly stuff. "Is anyone there? What's your name? How did you die?" The planchette moved slowly, spelling out nonsense or stopping on no. We were giggling, thinking one of us was pushing it to freak the others out. But then things got weird. "Who's here with us?" Jenna asked. The planchette moved with purpose this time, spelling out Zozo. I felt a chill run down my spine. Zozo. I'd heard that name before, some kind of demon or evil spirit, but I didn't want to show fear in front of my friends. We laughed it off, but the atmosphere in the room shifted. It felt colder, heavier. Jenna, undeterred, asked another question. "What do you want?" The planchette jerked violently, almost knocking over a candle. You, it spelled out. We all froze. This wasn't fun anymore. "Let's stop," I said, trying to pull my fingers away. But Jenna kept going, her eyes wide, almost entranced. "When will we die?" she asked. The planchette spun in circles, faster and faster. Then it stopped abruptly and spelled out NOW. Suddenly, the candles blew out, plunging us into darkness. We heard a high-pitched, blood-curdling scream. It was coming from Jenna. The lights flickered back on, and we saw her convulsing. Her eyes rolled back into her head. Blood started pouring from her nose and ears. We panicked, trying to help her, but there was nothing we could do. She stopped breathing, her body going limp. We called 911, but it was too late. The paramedics arrived and pronounced her dead on the spot. The official cause was a brain aneurysm, but I knew it was something else, something sinister. We all knew. In the following days, things got worse. Jenna's death was just the beginning. Weird things started happening to the rest of us. My friend Mike started seeing shadows following him. He said he could hear whispers in the night, calling his name. He stopped sleeping, afraid of what he might see if he closed his eyes. One night, Mike's mum called me in hysterics. Mike had disappeared. The police found his car parked near a cliff, the doors wide open. They searched for days but never found his body. It was like he had vanished into thin air. Then there was Sarah. She was the toughest among us, always the skeptic. But even she wasn't immune. She started complaining about strange dreams, nightmares where she was being chased by something she couldn't see. She'd wake up with scratches on her body, deep, bloody marks that looked like they were made by claws. The final straw was when she called me at 3 a.m, screaming. I rushed over to her apartment, but I was too late. She had slashed her wrists in the bathtub. The walls were covered in frantic scribbles, Zozo, written over and over again in her blood. That left just me and Tom. We decided to stick together, thinking we'd be safer that way. We were wrong. Tom started seeing Jenna everywhere. He said she would appear in mirrors, her eyes hollow and accusing. He couldn't take it. One night, he drove his car into a tree at full speed. The impact killed him instantly. Now it's just me. I haven't slept in days. I see things moving in the corners of my vision. My phone rings at odd hours, but there's never anyone there. I hear whispers, calling my name, telling me to join them. I'm scared to be alone, but I can't be with anyone else. I don't want to put them in danger. I know my time is running out. The Ouija board's predictions are coming true in the worst ways imaginable. If you're reading this, please, whatever you do, never mess with a Ouija board. It's not a game. It's a doorway to something dark and evil. Something that won't stop until it's claimed us all. I can hear it now, whispering my name. It's getting closer. I don't think I have much time left. If I disappear, remember my story. Warn others. Don't let this happen to anyone else. Goodbye. After Tom's death, I was a wreck. The police were suspicious, of course. 4 young people dying within weeks of each other raised a lot of questions. They interrogated me for hours, looking for any sign of foul play, but there was nothing they could pin on me. The deaths were all bizarre, but ruled as accidents or suicides. No one would believe it was the result of a cursed Ouija board session. I tried to go back to some semblance of normal life, but it was impossible. I moved back in with my parents, thinking maybe the familiarity would help. I was wrong. My mum was worried sick, but she couldn't understand what I was going through. I stopped talking to friends, deleted my social media, and avoided everyone. Isolation seemed safer, but the whispers never stopped. One night, I was in my childhood bedroom, trying to sleep. I hadn't had a decent night's rest since Jenna's death. I felt something cold brush against my cheek. I opened my eyes and saw a dark figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was tall, with elongated limbs and hollow, glowing eyes. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure slowly reached out its hand, its fingers unnaturally long and clawed. Just as it was about to touch me, my mum burst into the room. Turning on the light, the figure vanished, leaving me gasping for breath. She saw the terror in my eyes and held me while I broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. I tried to explain what was happening, but she just kept saying, "It's going to be okay," over and over. But it wasn't okay. It was far from it. The next day, I decided to visit Jenna's grave. I felt a desperate need to apologize, to seek some sort of closure. The cemetery was eerily quiet, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the wind. I found her grave easily, a simple headstone with her name and dates. As I stood there, I felt a presence behind me. Turning slowly, I saw Jenna standing there, but she was different. Her eyes were empty, and her skin was pale and decayed. She opened her mouth to speak, but all that came out was a guttural, choking sound. I stumbled back, tripping over a gravestone. When I looked up again, she was gone. I ran back to my car, heart pounding, convinced I was losing my mind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still with me, watching, waiting. Desperation led me to seek out help from unconventional sources. I found a local paranormal investigator, a guy named Rick, who had a reputation for dealing with unexplainable events. He was a burly man with a grizzled beard and a no-nonsense attitude. I told him everything, from the Ouija board session to the deaths of my friends. Rick listened intently, his face grim. "You've unleashed something dark," he said. "Zozo is a malevolent entity. It thrives on fear and chaos. You need to sever the connection." We set up a cleansing ritual, hoping to banish Zozo once and for all. It involved sage, holy water, and chanting all the cliched stuff you see in movies. But I was willing to try anything. We started the ritual in my parents' basement, the darkest part of the house. The air was thick with tension, the smell of sage pungent and overwhelming. As Rick began chanting, the temperature dropped. I could see my breath forming in the air. The lights flickered, and then we heard it, a low, guttural growl echoing through the room. I felt a pressure on my chest like something was trying to crush me. Rick continued chanting, his voice growing louder, more desperate. Suddenly, the basement door slammed shut. The growling intensified, turning into a deafening roar. The lights went out, plunging us into complete darkness. I could feel something moving around us, brushing against my skin. Rick's chanting faltered, and then he screamed. I fumbled for my phone, using its flashlight to see. Rick was on the ground, blood pouring from deep gashes across his chest. His eyes were wide with terror, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. I tried to help him, but there was nothing I could do. The growling was right next to me now, hot breath on my neck. I turned and saw the figure again, those hollow eyes boring into me. It reached out, and I felt a searing pain as its claws dug into my shoulder. I screamed, thrashing wildly, and then everything went black. When I came to, I was in a hospital bed. My parents were there, relief and fear etched on their faces. They told me I was found unconscious in the basement, with deep claw marks on my shoulder. Rick was dead, his body discovered by the police after my mum called them, panicked when she heard my screams. The official cause of death was listed as an animal attack, but I knew the truth. Zozo was still with me, still hunting. The ritual had failed. The connection wasn't severed. If anything, it was stronger than ever. Now I'm back at home, trying to piece my life together. But every night I hear the whispers, feel the cold touch of unseen hands. I know it's only a matter of time before Zozo claims me too. If anyone reads this, please heed my warning. Never, ever mess with a Ouija board. The price is too high. The consequence is too horrific. I'm living proof, and I don't know how much longer I have left. Stay away. For your sake, stay away. Life after the failed ritual was a blur of nightmares and paranoia. Every night I found myself waking up in cold sweats, my heart racing as I struggled to shake off the lingering images of Jenna, Mike, Sarah, and Tom. Their faces twisted in pain and terror, accusing me, haunting me. I couldn't escape them, no matter where I went. The worst part was the constant feeling of being watched, no matter where I was. At home, in the shower, at the grocery store, I felt those hollow eyes on me. The whispers followed me everywhere, growing louder, more insistent. They started making sense, urging me to do things, dark, violent things. I was losing control of my own mind. My parents tried to help, but there was only so much they could do. They were convinced I needed psychiatric help. I went along with it, hoping medication and therapy might give me some relief. But the doctors didn't understand. They couldn't see what I saw, couldn't hear the whispers, or feel the icy fingers that gripped my soul. One evening, I decided to confide in my older brother Jake. He had always been the rational one, the skeptic, but he was also fiercely protective of me. If anyone could help, it was him. We met at a bar, the noise and crowd a temporary distraction from the horrors I faced. I spilled everything, leaving nothing out. Jake listened, his face growing more and more serious. When I finished, he didn't laugh or dismiss me like I feared he would. Instead, he leaned in, his voice low and urgent. "We need to destroy that board," he said. "It's the source of all this. We get rid of it. Maybe we can end this nightmare." It made sense, but the thought of facing that cursed object again filled me with dread. Still, I agreed. I was desperate. We drove back to the cabin that night, armed with gasoline and matches. The drive was tense, the silence between us heavy with anticipation and fear. The cabin was exactly as we had left it, cold, dark, and foreboding. As we entered, I felt a wave of nausea. Memories of that night flooded back, making it hard to breathe. The Ouija board was still there, sitting innocuously on the table, as if waiting for us. Jake didn't waste any time. He doused the board in gasoline, soaking it thoroughly. I struck a match, my hands trembling, and dropped it onto the board. Flames erupted, quickly consuming the wood. The fire roared, the heat intense. For a moment, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this would work. But then, the lights flickered, and the room grew icy cold. The flames turned a sickly green, and we heard it, the growling, deeper and more menacing than before. The shadows in the room seemed to come alive, writhing and twisting. Jake and I backed away, our eyes wide with terror. Suddenly, the fire was snuffed out, leaving the board charred but intact. The growling grew louder, and the shadows converged, forming the tall, dark figure. Its eyes glowed with malevolent glee. It reached out, and Jake screamed as unseen forces lifted him off the ground, slamming him against the wall. Blood sprayed from his mouth as his body convulsed. I tried to move, to help him, but I was frozen in place. The figure turned its gaze on me, and I felt a searing pain in my chest. It was like my heart was being squeezed by an icy hand. I gasped, falling to my knees, tears streaming down my face. Jake's body dropped to the floor, lifeless, his eyes staring blankly ahead. The figure slowly dissolved into the shadows, leaving me alone with the corpse of my brother. The silence was deafening, the horror of what had just happened sinking in. I don't know how long I sat there, paralyzed by fear and grief. Eventually, I stumbled to my feet, numb and disoriented. I had to leave, had to get out of that cursed place. I drove home in a daze, not even sure how I managed to make it back without crashing. When my parents saw me covered in blood, they panicked. I told them what happened, but they didn't believe me. They thought I had lost my mind, that I had killed Jake in some kind of psychotic break. The police were called, and I was taken into custody. I tried to explain, but it was no use. The story was too unbelievable. I was charged with Jake's murder, awaiting trial in a psychiatric ward. The whispers never stopped. They taunted me, telling me it was only a matter of time before Zozo claimed me too. I'm writing this from my cell, hoping someone out there will believe me, will understand. If you're reading this, please, don't let curiosity lead you down the same path. Destroy the Ouija board if you can, but be prepared for the consequences. Zozo doesn't let go easily. It's only a matter of time before it comes for you too. This is my final warning. Stay away from the darkness. Once it has its claws in you, there's no escape. I've lost everything. My friends, my family, my sanity. Don't let it happen to you. Life in the psychiatric ward was a special kind of hell. The doctors pumped me full of meds, trying to quiet the whispers and suppress the visions, but nothing worked. Zozo was always there, lurking in the shadows, watching me. Every night I'd wake up to the same nightmare. Jenna, Mike, Sarah, and Tom, their faces twisted in agony, reaching out to me, begging for help I couldn't give. The other patients avoided me. They said I talked in my sleep, screamed about demons and shadows. The orderlies treated me with a mix of pity and fear. I was the crazy guy who killed his own brother after all. They didn't know the truth. They couldn't understand the darkness that followed me, the curse that had ruined my life. Weeks turned into months, and my trial date loomed closer. My parents visited occasionally, but it was clear they were struggling to cope. Their once bright, hopeful faces were now etched with despair. They wanted to believe me, but the evidence was too damning, the story too unbelievable. One night, as I lay in my bed, I heard a familiar voice. Peter. It was Jenna, her voice soft and sorrowful. I sat up, my heart pounding. She was standing at the foot of my bed, her eyes filled with sadness. Jenna, I'm so sorry, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. You have to end this, she said. Zozo won't stop until it has taken everything from you. How? I asked, desperation in my voice. How do I stop it? Before she could answer, the door to my room burst open, and two orderlies rushed in. They had heard me talking and assumed I was having another episode. They restrained me, injected me with a sedative, and soon, darkness claimed me. When I woke up, I was strapped to my bed, my wrists and ankles bound. The room was dim, the only light coming from the small window high on the wall. The whispers were louder now, a constant, insidious presence in my mind. You can't escape, they hissed. You belong to us now. Days passed in a blur of sedatives and nightmares. I was losing hope, sinking deeper into the abyss. Then, one night, the whispers grew louder, more urgent. It's time, they said. Time to join us. The door to my room creaked open, and a figure stepped inside. It was Rick, the paranormal investigator who had tried to help me. But something was wrong. His eyes were hollow and his skin was pale and lifeless. Rick, I whispered, my voice trembling. He didn't respond. Instead, he walked to the foot of my bed and began chanting in a language I didn't understand. The air grew cold, and the shadows in the room seemed to come alive, swirling around him. Suddenly, the restraints on my wrists and ankles snapped open. I sat up, my heart pounding with fear and confusion. Rick continued chanting, his voice growing louder, more intense. "What's happening?" I asked, but he didn't answer. The shadows converged, forming the tall, dark figure with hollow eyes. Zozo. It reached out, and I felt a searing pain in my chest, as if my heart was being ripped out. I screamed, falling to the floor, convulsing in agony. "End it!" Jenna's voice echoed in my mind. "You have to end it." With the last of my strength, I crawled towards the door. The pain was unbearable, but I knew I had to keep moving. Rick's chanting grew louder, more desperate, as if he was trying to hold Zozo at bay. I stumbled out into the hallway, the cold tiles slick with my own blood. The whispers were deafening now, a cacophony of voices urging me to give in, to let go. But I couldn't. I had to stop this. I made my way to the common room, where the other patients were gathered. They looked up in shock and fear as I burst in, covered in blood and trembling with pain. "Help me!" I screamed, but they just stared, too terrified to move. Suddenly, the lights flickered and the room grew icy cold. Zozo was here. The patients began to scream, the orderlies rushing in to restore order, but it was too late. The shadows converged and Zozo appeared, its hollow eyes fixed on me. "End it," Jenna's voice whispered. "Now!" In a final act of desperation, I grabbed a shard of broken glass from the floor. The pain was excruciating, but I forced myself to stand, facing Zozo. With a scream of rage and defiance, I plunged the shard into my chest, aiming for my heart. The pain was blinding, and darkness closed in around me. But in that moment, I felt a strange sense of peace. The whispers faded, and Zozo's hollow eyes widened in surprise. The shadows began to dissipate, the cold receding. As I fell to the floor, my vision dimming, I saw Jenna, her face serene and grateful. "Thank you," she whispered. "You did it." And then there was only darkness. I woke up in a hospital bed, the beeping of machines a constant reminder that I was still alive. The pain in my chest was excruciating, a dull, throbbing ache that radiated through my entire body. I blinked, trying to clear the fog from my mind, and slowly realized I was in the ICU. My parents were sitting beside me, their faces a mix of relief and worry. "Peter, thank God," my mum whispered, tears streaming down her face. My dad nodded, his eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. "How?" I croaked, my throat dry and scratchy. The last thing I remembered was the cold darkness and the searing pain as I plunged the shard into my chest. "You were found in the common room," my dad said. "The doctors say it's a miracle you're alive. You lost so much blood, but somehow you survived." I didn't feel like a miracle. I felt like a shattered shell of a person, but the whispers were gone. For the first time in months, I didn't feel Zozo's presence looming over me. Maybe, just maybe, it was really over. The days in the hospital were a blur of painkillers, doctors, and physical therapy. My parents were always there, supporting me, trying to understand what had happened. I told them everything, every horrific detail. They didn't interrupt, didn't dismiss me. They just listened, their faces pale and strained. When I was finally discharged, I went back home with my parents. The house felt safe, a refuge from the horrors I'd experienced, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still lurking, waiting for the right moment to strike. One night, as I lay in bed, I felt a familiar chill. My heart raced, fear gripping me, but instead of Zozo, it was Jenna. She appeared at the foot of my bed, her face serene. "Peter," she said softly, "it's really over. You did it. You stopped Zozo." Tears filled my eyes as I reached out to her. "Jenna, I'm so sorry for everything." She smiled, a warm, genuine smile that eased the ache in my chest. "It wasn't your fault. You were brave, braver than any of us. Now you need to live, to move on. With that, she faded away, leaving me with a sense of peace I'd thought was lost forever. The nightmares lessened, and the shadows in my mind began to recede. I started seeing a therapist, someone who believed me, who helped me process the trauma and find a way forward. Months passed, and slowly I began to rebuild my life. The memories of that horrible night at the cabin remained, but they no longer had the power to paralyze me. I reconnected with old friends, made new ones, and even started dating again. Life was far from perfect, but it was mine, and I was determined to make the most of it. One day, while cleaning out my closet, I found an old box filled with photos from happier times. There were pictures of Jenna, Mike, Sarah, Tom, and me, smiling and carefree. I sat down, tears streaming down my face, and whispered a silent promise to them. I would live for all of us, carry their memories forward, and never forget the lessons I'd learned. As I put the box away, a small piece of paper fell out. It was a note from Jenna, written in her neat handwriting. "Never give up, Peter. You're stronger than you know." I held the note to my chest, feeling a warmth spread through me. Jenna was right. I was stronger than I knew, and with that strength, I would face whatever came next, unafraid. In the end, the Ouija board had unleashed unimaginable horrors, but it had also revealed a resilience within me I never knew I had. Zozo was gone, but the experience had left its mark, a reminder of the darkness that exists just beyond the veil. I would always be vigilant, always cautious, but I would no longer live in fear. The final chapter of this story isn't about horror or darkness. It's about survival, resilience, and the power of the human spirit to overcome even the most terrifying of experiences. I am Peter, and this is my story. A story of pain, loss, and ultimately, hope.